Welcome everyone to Wednesday Night at the Lab. I'm Tom Zinnan. I work here at the UW-Madison Biotechnology Center. I also work for UW Extension Cooperative Extension, and on behalf of those folks and our other co-organizers, Wisconsin Public Television, the Wisconsin Alumni Association, and the UW-Madison Science Alliance, thanks again for coming to Wednesday Night at the Lab. We do this every Wednesday night, 50 times a year. Tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Stephanie Jones. She's with the UW's Institute for Sleep and Consciousness. She's going to talk to us about Are You Really Sleeping? Perspectives from the Brain. Sleep is something we all try to do 1/3 of our life. It's a pretty amazing time in neuroscience to think about what we can learn about the brain and the interaction of the brain with the rest of the body when sleeping's going on. So I'm looking forward to this. Stephanie was born in Newburyport, Massachusetts, and went to high school there. She got her undergraduate degree at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, got her master's degree here at UW-Madison, and her PhD here in neuroscience. And as I mentioned, she's with the Institute for Sleep and Consciousness at the School of Medicine and Public Health. Please join me in welcoming Stephanie Jones to Wednesday Night at the Lab.
Can you hear me? My microphone's working? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Tom, for inviting me. I did have, one of the central reasons I think Tom invited me was because we use this really cool technology in the lab. It's a 256 electrode head net, and I was going to have it right here on a disembodied head, and I forgot it. Sorry about that. I spent a lot of time working on this title to try to come up with something compelling to get you here. And thank you to my friend Tiffany Scheller and Sharon Besser, who are my neighbors and helped me make a really compelling title. And then I chose this outfit. So I fear that the content might have suffered a little because I spent so much time on those other things. But we'll see. So what I'm going to talk about is the work that we do at the Wisconsin Institute for Sleep and Consciousness.
Stephanie, can you talk a little louder? Just going to refresh you.
How am I now? Better? Oh, it's echoey. I would love to say that this work is all mine and I'm a genius and I did it all on my own. But alas, that would be a lie. I'm going to present a body of work that was produced here over the course of maybe 10, 15 years. It involves a huge number of people, but there are a few that deserve honorable mention. The center director is Giulio Tononi. He is arguably one of the world's leading sleep research experts. He also is a consciousness researcher, also arguably the world's leading theorist of consciousness, Nobel Prize caliber, but don't tell him I ever said that. His partner, research partner, is Chiara Chiarelli. So the hypothesis I'm going to present to you was developed by the two of these folks together. So they are the two main PIs in the group. And then Ruth Benka also did a lot of work on the clinical component of this body of research. She is now gone at the University of California, Irvine, but she has made substantive contributions to this work. And also Brady Riedner, who is my closest colleague. Brady and I do a lot of work on the clinical end together. But Brady sort of runs through all of this work because he's sort of the technical guy. He is responsible for developing a lot of the analytical tools we use to do this research. The Wisconsin Institute for Sleep and Consciousness was, up until April, the Wisconsin Center for Sleep Medicine and Sleep Research. So we've had a leadership change and a title change. And here we are. And I will say this. Scientists aren't generally trained to speak to lay audiences. So this is kind of an experiment for me. But I do feel like it's an important thing to do because after all, you're all paying my salary, right? I'm out there at Research Park partying on federal tax dollars. So I feel like, you know, I have an obligation, we have an obligation to present the work we do in some way that's understandable. I don't know if what I'm going to show you is understandable, that's the problem. So I would love it if you would all come up after and say to me, this was too much, this was too little, this was difficult to understand, etc. I have a really thick skin, so you don't have to worry about hurting my feelings. I'd like to continue to do this kind of thing, so I'd like to hear from you. We all know what sleep is, right? Or we think we do. We all do it. But sleep is a state of reduced responsiveness to the environment that's readily reversible. So we measure sleep in the mammal with electrophysiology, you know, technology. But basically, sleep is fundamentally, first and foremost, a behavior. And we can distinguish this in all animals. It's rapidly reversible or readily reversible. That distinguishes it from a state like coma or hibernation. As a little fun fact, animals who hibernate will come out of hibernation to sleep, in fact, and they come out in a state of sleep deprivation. So I got a quote. Everybody starts to talk with a quote, right? Sleep is a criminal waste of time inherited from our cave days. Bam! Does anybody know who said that? Guesses? Thomas Edison. You get a bag of candy. He said this around the time he was inventing the light bulb. And this is the time when we started invading the night, right? What was this? The late 1800s. We start invading the night and giving short shrift to sleep. We're controlling our environment. Some predictions say we now sleep from anywhere from 1 to 3 hours less. So you can imagine in a place like Wisconsin, when the days are really short, we slept longer. But now we control our environment. We don't sleep so long. Edison would say that that was a wonderful thing. Do we think he's right? Probably not, right? I think I'm going to try to convince you that that's not correct, that we shouldn't be giving short shrift to sleep. And why not? Well, I'm going to argue that sleep is incredibly important. If it weren't, we wouldn't spend about 35% of our time asleep. We sleep more than we do pretty much anything else, despite, you know, pharmaceutical companies trying to dispense with it. This is some data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So if you live 77.8 years, you will spend 27 years sleeping. If you work until you're 65, you'll spend 10 years working. So sleep is an incredibly important thing. When I was looking for some of these statistics, I also learned that women spend 17 years on a diet. I was like, what? And then I thought, yeah, I'm on a diet right now, of course. So why else am I going to tell you sleep is important? Sleep is absolutely universal. So all animals do it, from the lowly fruit fly, birds do it. And it's so important that animals have evolved really special adaptations to it, right? This is so gross. This is a parrotfish, and he secretes a ball of mucus when he sleeps, right? I'll keep my duvet. Dolphins and many species of birds will sleep unihemispherically. That means half the brain will go to sleep. It's important in aquatic mammals, as you can imagine, because they have to keep moving, right? So seals do this, dolphins do this. There are all kinds of interesting adaptations, and I think that argues for sleep being fundamentally important, right? If nature could have dispensed with it, I think it sure would have. Sleep is also dangerous. I mean, from the perspective of an animal, right, they put themselves at significant predation risk. I mean, to some extent, we do too. And sleep is dangerous for us insofar as it comes at a huge opportunity cost. We can't do all the things that we want to do, right, to make ourselves successful as a species, reproduce. Most of us don't do reproduction during sleep. We don't work. We don't do anything important. And another thing that argues for the importance of sleep is what happens when we don't get enough. We're all familiar with this. in light of the conversation about sleep's role in cognitive function, memory consolidation, I like to highlight that sleep is also fundamentally involved in emotion regulation, right? You know that if you haven't slept and your office mate is tapping on his keyboard, you just want to light him on fire, right? For everything he does. I'm thinking about my colleague Brady when I talk about that. This is also particularly robust in children. I'll come back to that. That's a theme for me, children, and the importance of sleep in that population. When children are sleep deprived, we all know the toddler, screaming. They have profound difficulties with emotion regulation, but it does continue across the lifespan. And also, of course, not sleeping has profound effects on cognition and performance. So when we're sleepy, our brains function less well. We don't remember things, we don't perform, we're impulsive, we make bad decisions. 26% of drivers report falling asleep at the wheel once to twice a week. Something like 38% of all auto crashes are associated with drowsy driving. And some major disasters, Chernobyl and the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, were allegedly associated with sleep loss. So what have I just argued for you there? That sleep is really important. It's really fundamental, and we can't dispense with it. So why do we do it, though? It's almost an embarrassment in biology. So we have come so far, but we can't answer this very simple question. Why do we sleep? If it's this important, we should know why. Well, nobody agrees on the answer to this question. So what I'm going to present to you is a hypothesis. I might even call it a theory, which was developed over the years by those people I outlined for you, Giulio Tononi, Chiara Cirelli. And the argument is that sleep, in its simplest form, sleep is the price we pay for learning, okay? So I'm going to outline this in really basic terms before I then get into showing you all this data. And if it's too much data, you can blame Tom, because he told me that you all wanted to see data, data, data. So I am going to bring it on. I'm going to define a couple things. So I'm going to use the word plasticity a lot. The brain is moldable across the lifespan. It's more moldable when you're young, as you can imagine. You come out of the womb and you become bombarded by experience. It's that experience that builds and optimizes a brain. So plasticity is the ability of that brain to modify its structure and function following experience, okay? This is a fundamental biological feature, but remarkably, we haven't known this to be true for very long. We used to think that, you came out and things just stayed as they were. Little people got bigger and that was it. So plasticity is also the foundation for learning, okay? Is everybody with me? If you have any questions, you can raise your hand or just shout, use your effector muscle, put that hand up. I can hardly see anything though because I'm being blinded by these lights. So this hypothesis is called the synaptic homeostasis hypothesis. We call it SHI. Basically, what it says is this. You walk around during the day and you are learning. So I'm going to show you experiments where we formalize learning, right? But just the act of living, walking about, is learning. It's acquiring experience and modifying your behavior, okay? So you walk around and you learn, and you learn, and you learn, and you learn, and at a certain point, your brain kind of just taps out, right? Learning is an expensive thing. And then when you go to sleep, what sleep does is it takes down all the noise of the day, and it preserves the important stuff. I'll say that again in the next few slides. It seems like a really simple idea, and I think one of the beauties of it is that it is such a simple idea. But believe it or not, it's controversial. So not every sleep researcher will agree with all the things that I'm about to tell you, right? They're wrong. So Some scientists believe that you actually sort of learn while you sleep, that when you're sleeping, connections get stronger. Your brain is kind of reflecting on experience and optimizing itself. Yeah, there's not a lot of evidence for it, but people do persist in their beliefs. Okay, so here's a basic principle. Wake is always associated with learning, right? That makes perfect sense to everybody? Yeah? Because if you didn't learn while you were awake, imagine if you learned while you were asleep. So you're offline and your brain is creating a conscious world, right? It does while you dream, even though you're not aware of it. You can't sample your world. You would just be taking information generated in this private offline world. It doesn't make any sense, right? So you learn while you're awake. You perceive the world and you change your behavior accordingly. So does everybody know what a neuron is? Yes, okay, excellent, we've got a good audience. So from the neuron's perspective, right, these are units of information transfer in the brain. From the perspective of a neuron, learning is essentially increasing your relationship with your neighbor. It's increasing synaptic strength, okay? So across the day, you're learning, and learning is increasing strength between synapses, right? That's how you build a big brain that has learned a lot, right? Was there anything else I was going to say about that? I don't think so. So, as you're going across your day and you're learning and your synapses are getting stronger and stronger, right? At a certain point, you tap out. It becomes too much. You get saturated, right? Because synapses, in fact, are really expensive things. Even under optimal conditions, the brain is about 2% of our body mass, and it consumes about 25% of our resources, right? In terms of glucose. It has incredible energetic demands. In synapses in particular, so all those resources, most of those resources go to signaling between neurons, not just housekeeping functions, right? So if you're learning and strengthening synapses all day long, you can imagine a point at which resources are depleted, but also space. I mean, we don't have unlimited space in this skull, right? We don't have the capacity to continue to grow and grow and grow. So at a certain point, something has to happen, or you will just explode. So this is where sleep comes in. Sleep comes in, and it downscales synapses. So the things that are important have been tagged as such, because from a neuron's perspective, learning is firing or not firing, right? So if something's important to you during the day, your neuron is somehow guided by this is important, right? So they fire, they fire, they fire. They get stronger. And then so sleep comes in, and it just says globally, I'm going to take down all this noise. And what's important will be left behind. And I'm going to show you in detail some experimental modeling of this, and also talk specifically about the kinds of sleep that does this, the kind of sleep. So in this way, sleep improves memory, right? Sleep aids in consolidation of memory and all the things that we do, insight, gist extraction. Everybody knows the sense of you wake up refreshed. Sometimes you've worked on a problem and it seems solved, right? So what sleep has done is it's increased the signal to noise ratio. It's taken down all the nonsense and left behind all the good stuff. Is everybody buying my story so far? Mm-hmm. Good. Okay, so what have I said? Sleep serves an absolutely essential function. I showed you a lot of evidence to support that, right? Waking is associated with learning, which is represented in our brain by increased synaptic strength. Sleep removes all the noise of the day by downscaling, okay? Just globally downscaling synapses. And then here's the other thing. Sleep also is a reset button. That's how I like to think of it. You know how Staples has that easy button. I think of sleep as the reset button because there's, at some point, you know, as I described, you become saturated. Your brain no longer has the capacity, there's not enough room for new synapses or new learning. There aren't resources to support it. So sleep comes in and does a reset, and you wake up the next day refreshed, and energized, ready to learn anew. Does anybody have any questions? Yes?
What is gist?
Oh, gist. Gist, you know, gist like insight, getting the gist. Yeah, yeah. It's not a technical term. Okay. So, you're all buying what I said so far. So, I'm going to describe the kind of sleep that does this, that hits the reset button for us, okay? So, wake plasticity and the sleep reset. I'm going to talk about slow waves. So you probably all have heard of the different kinds of sleep, right? Does everybody know what kinds of sleep we have? No? REM, rapid eye movement sleep, and non-REM, non-rapid eye movement sleep. Non-rapid eye movement sleep takes up about, in a healthy adult, 75% of sleep time. Okay, so this gentleman, Simone, wearing this head net was the fantastic piece of technology I failed to bring. That's, people, believe it or not, sleep with that net on quite comfortably. I've done it myself. So here is a night of sleep. I'm showing you this is from a standard EEG set. This is recorded from the scalp, right? These little squiggly lines, in fact, convey a lot of important information. And over in the right-hand corner is a hypnogram. That just shows you how those stages go across the night. So a typical night of sleep, you go from stage 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Actually, now we only do stages 1, 2, and 3. It's just convention. And then you will have a bout of REM sleep. And you can see that as across the night, REM sleep gets longer and longer. That black bar represents the duration of REM. Is this a pointer? No, apparently not. Oh, it is. Okay. Yeah. So you descend into sleep like this, stage 1, stage 2. You know, stage 1 is that stage where you'll sometimes have what's called hypnic jerks, that sense of falling, right? And at this point, your consciousness gets a little bit wobbly. You might be in a kind of fugue state, is what I like to call it. And then you descend into stage 2. This is the hallmark of stage 2, sleep spindles and K complexes. Those allegedly have some special functions for learning and memory. And then we get into what's called slow wave activity, delta wave. Delta waves. This is arguably the most important kind of sleep, and this is the kind of sleep I'm talking about when I say sleep hits the reset button. And people are fond of saying, oh, and this below is REM sleep, which looks a whole lot like waking. Actually, in this image not. But REM sleep basically looks like an awake brain. It's an activated high-frequency signal. People often ask me if REM sleep is the deepest sleep. In fact, no. The deepest sleep that you go into is this sleep here. It changes across development like everything does, right? So when you're young, when you're a child, children have enormous, long, slow waves. It takes up a larger proportion of their sleep. And then as you age, like with everything, these sadly go away. In men, it's like falling off a cliff. And in women, it's a gradual decline. But so these big important waves change across the developmental spectrum. Oh, this we've just determined does indeed work. So I was just showing you those waves. Now this is a movie. It's, I'm showing you basically 3 layers of the cortex, okay? What you're going to see here is the firing of neurons when they're awake and then when they go to sleep. Here we go, hopefully. Okay, so you see the fast spiking firing, those flashing, those are neurons. This is the local field potential, okay? Now we're going to put the model to sleep. Soonly-ish. That is sleep. So those are what's called off periods. So this is when you see those great big waves on the surface of the cortex using EEG, that's what it looks like if you were to record intracellularly, right? Neurons will all go off together and then fire together, off together, fire together. So it's like a symphony, all coherently singing together. Okay, so now I'm going to have to orient you to the topo plots. So we use a technology called high-density EEG. This is 256 electrodes recorded from the scalp in that net that we just saw. So slow wave activity is the special sleep I'm talking about. I'm going to refer to it as slow wave activity much of the time, okay? And we know a lot of things about this sleep. It is, when you look at a topo plot, the red parts, where it's red, suggests that power in this low frequency, slow wave activity domain is strongest there, okay? So when I point to this right here, you know that there's a lot of slow wave activity going on in that region frontally. In fact, that's what the topography of slow wave activity looks like if you just take a freeze frame. So what I'm showing you here is, this is slow wave activity when following a night of sleep deprivation, okay? So this is following a night of sleep deprivation. There's a whole lot of power in that first hour of sleep. This is slow wave activity on just a regular night's sleep. This is slow wave activity on a night when you've had a nap during the day. And this, I totally forget what that is. It doesn't matter. Because my point is this. Slow wave activity is homeostatically regulated, right? So the more you stay awake, the more power you have here. And this will become important as we go along, okay? So if you are sleep deprived, you don't really increase the duration of sleep when you have a sleep epoch. What you increase is the power or the intensity of sleep. And that is reflected in this very special slow wave activity. Okay, now we're going to get to learning. Now remember, what I said was that we learn all day long, right? Right now we're all learning. But in a lab environment, you have to formalize it somehow to test it, right? And so what I'm going to talk to you about is local learning and sleep need, okay? And how we know that they're linked. So how we know that sleep, particularly slow wave activity, is involved in the process of learning, okay? You with me? So I'm going to talk about some experiments that we have done to show evidence that slow wave activity is important for regulating synaptic plasticity. I'm going to show you 3 different models. Remember, I said that learning is associated with increases in synaptic strength, right? And that sleep is associated with downscaling the unimportant stuff. Okay, so I'm going to show you 3 different experiments here. The first one, I think that's my next slide. Yes. Okay. So in this task, what you do is we train people to rotate. It's an implicit learning task. We train them to rotate a cursor and vary it by a certain number of degrees. So essentially, they are figuring out that there's some rotation, but they're not aware of what that is. The reason we use this particular task is because we know that it's underpinned by a certain region of the contralateral motor cortex, right? So it's a well-defined task. We can look at where the learning is happening, essentially. So, and what we find is that when people do this task, slow wave activity is increased in the contralateral motor cortex, right? So we know that the task activates this contralateral motor cortex, contralateral to the side that you're using, right? Because your brain is, and what we see is that slow wave activity increases locally in that region, right? And in fact, we know it's not just a motor effect because the percent change in slow wave activity, so the more intensely you sleep, those who sleep, let me put it this way, those who sleep more intensely, learn better. So the performance is associated with that regional sleep intensity. Does that make sense? Or is that too much? No? We got it? Anybody have any questions? User effector muscle? Yes?
I have read that in earlier centuries, people slept differently. They would be up and active for a period of time and go to bed with the chickens and wake up in the middle of the night and have another period of activity when they might go visiting their neighbors and all kinds of things, and then go back to bed. Would that suggest that those people would have not learned as well?
Not learned as well?
Because they would
Well,
be the effect of a nap?
well, so I think that any organism can sleep. So humans have one big central sleep period. That's how we are built. So you can split up the sleep period, but it's not ideal. It's not your best sleep. But provided you are getting slow wave sleep, presumably you could learn as well. So we do see when people take naps during the day, that nap is associated with performance improvement in all kinds of tasks. Not just motor tasks, but any task you learn in a lab, you'll learn word matching, right? So naps will improve performance. We can learn during the day. Of course, we can. If I gave you a list right now and said, come back in 5 minutes and, do you remember this, you would. But if I allowed you to sleep on it, you'd learn it better, basically. We can learn during the day, but sleep optimizes it. Yes?
I'm not sure, I may have misunderstood. I thought you said that sleep intensity was correlated with not sleeping.
No, sleep intensity is a good thing.
It's a good thing.
Yes.
You had those pictures of the person's brain that are associated with people who are not sleeping well, and you showed more activity.
Which picture was that?
Sleep deprivation. You showed much, yeah.
Let's go back. What? Oh, the circles. Oh, no. So what I was trying to convey was that that sleep intensity is homeostatically regulated. So oh, okay. We're supposed to save questions till the end, apparently. But this is a potential fundamental misunderstanding. So what I'm arguing here is that kind of the harder you're awake, the harder you sleep, right? So and if you do a lot of learning during the day, right, your brain will sleep harder, more intensely, and there's nothing you can do about it. Biology drives that. So if you stay awake, which I think is equivalent to learning, okay, you will sleep harder. Now, what I've shown you in this task is that if you tax a particular brain region hard, it will sleep hard, right? This special sleep, this downscaling sleep, non-REM, slow wave activity.
Which is the dark blue circle.
Which is the dark red stuff. This is sleep intensity. So this person has stayed awake for a long time, so his brain is sleeping really hard. This person, I forget what he did. Did he have a nap? No, that's our nap. That's just a regular night of sleep. Okay? Does that clear it up at all for anybody? Yes? Okay. Here we go. I've lost my place. Okay. So basically what I'm showing you here is that we are working this particular motor cortex really hard. And then what is happening is the brain in that region is sleeping really hard. So of course, keep in mind the whole brain is asleep here, right? But what we've done is we've taxed it. So we have shown that if you tax it really hard, you can make it sleep in a special way. So, if you're learning to play the piano, for example, your whole brain will be asleep, but particular regions of it will sleep harder than other regions because you've taxed it. Does that help everybody? And it's associated with performance improvement. So if you were scientists, you would say to me, yeah, but how do you know it's just not a motor issue, that you're just moving that arm. But in fact, what we know is that the people who do better, who improve on that rotation task, right, they sleep harder. So there's a direct relationship between how well you do and how hard you sleep. It seems to be that sleep is linking those two things fundamentally. Oh my gosh, so I'll just tell you another thing. We can also just use something called TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. It's a big, big coil, goes click, 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 almost blows your eardrums out. And we can tax the motor cortex with this, right? Basically what we do is we're making neurons fire like crazy, experimentally, okay? So I'm inducing the brain to work really hard, not with a task, but basically I'm inducing synaptic strength, learning, right, with this big magnetic coil. And then what I see is, once again, when I tax that brain really hard, it sleeps really hard in that really small region. So keep in mind, the whole brain is asleep, but I'm taxing it hard and it's sleeping hard. We also see this in animals. I mean, I could show you data from fruit flies to support this argument. So this is a rat. He does a reaching task. He reaches for a sugar pellet. So it's the same kind of thing. The contralateral motor cortex is involved in this task. As he reaches, he learns to reach. The contralateral motor cortex sleeps harder and harder. The better he does, the harder that part of his brain sleeps. So what I'm telling you here is that sleep can be local, and it's use dependent. So if you work it hard, it sleeps hard, and that can happen on a regional basis. So what I'm saying is stronger synapses equals better performance and more slow wave activity, right? Remember, waking is associated with stronger synapses because that's the foundation of learning. So I've just shown you data in a task in a person, a task in a rat, and then just inducing it with the magnetic coil. If I make synapses stronger, I make the brain sleep harder in that region. I can also do the opposite. If I immobilize your arm, the motor cortex that underpins that arm won't sleep as hard. See? So we put someone in a cast for a week, believe it or not, or a sling, they don't use their arm. What you see is that the brain there isn't tired. The synapses aren't getting stronger, so it doesn't sleep so well. It doesn't need to sleep as well, is the argument. So weaker synapses equals less slow wave activity. So the argument I've built here for you is that sleep is directly involved in regulating plasticity at night, right? If you learn hard, you sleep hard. And sleep has some fundamental role in that process. Now, I said at the outset, I think, that there's a price to pay for this. So remember, we walk around all day, we're learning, and at a certain point, we tap out. There's not enough space, there aren't enough resources. So there is a price to pay for this plasticity. And what is that price? So the synaptic homeostasis hypothesis basically says synapses are expensive, there's not space to continue to learn and learn and learn. At a certain point, you saturate, you can't do it anymore, so you have to sleep. And in fact, you do have to sleep. There isn't, sleep is a biological imperative. So people who say, oh, I don't need to sleep, or long haul truck drivers saying, no, I'm fine. They're not fine, in fact, they are sleeping. So what I've shown you, I hope, is that there's evidence that a brain sleeps locally. So you can be a behaving person, and parts of your brain will go offline. Like I showed you when we were looking at those local field potentials, right? What it looks like is just a bunch of firing and then stop. Bunch of firing, stop. I'm going to show you that again. Oh, excellent. So this is a wake brain. All these neurons in your cortex are firing happily. Then the neuromodulatory environment changes, and voila. That's what a neuron looks like, or a set of neurons look like when it goes to sleep. So it's an off period, right? So what happens to people when they think they're awake is, in fact, often they're having off periods. That's the price you pay for plasticity. That's the price you pay for extending wakefulness beyond its natural duration. Or, so I'm going to show you some evidence for that, okay? So this is data from rats, okay? These are just freely moving animals. The longer you keep them awake, they will continue to move around and look like wakeful animals, right? This is the local field potential while they're awake. These are just all cells firing, okay? This is what happens during sleep deprivation. So this is an awake moving animal. He's having a great big off period. This is non-REM sleep, that special sleep. This is what the EEG looks like when you have an off period. So those great big slow waves that I'm talking about, that slow wave activity, if we were to record from the neuron, again, it looks like this. The neuron goes off. So what you see on the cortex is a great big slow wave, and what you see in the cell is off. So in a freely moving rat who is behaving, we're keeping them awake in nice, friendly ways. They like to be engaged. If you play with them forever, they'll stay awake. But while they're moving around, they'll have off periods, okay? So remember, go back to this. So we all know this feeling that when you haven't slept, you're tired, you're crabby, you make poor decisions. What is the foundation for that? Can anybody guess what I'm going to say the foundation is for that? Off periods. Excellent. Wow, you're learners. Oh no, my pointer. So the question is he awake or asleep? So you remember that I showed you this rat earlier performing the reaching task, right? And I said that his contralateral motor cortex would sleep really hard because he had learned well how to reach, how to grab, okay? Well, so this is what happens. If you keep him awake and keep him behaving on this task, you continue to make him reach. He will get to the point where he's so tired. He's still so motivated to get this, though, right? It's a sugar pellet, by the way. They love it. He will continue to reach, but every time he makes a mistake, guess what that's associated with? Off periods. So he's awake, he's moving around, he's even reaching. But when he drops, I mean, it's a fairly complex behavior for a rat, right? When he drops or has a miss, he has to squeeze his hand through this little, you can't really tell. But so those mistakes are associated with an off period. So this isn't a freely behaving animal. He's awake, he seems alert, but in fact, not so much. So I will tell you that we've done a similar thing in the peoples. 2 tasks. We keep people up for 40 hours doing 2 different things. Driving simulation, right? And we know that driving simulation activates a particular network. I mean, it activates a lot of networks, but this kind of posterior motor cortex, okay? This parietal network. Driving simulation generally activates this. So people are up for 40 hours and they're pretending to drive, okay? The other people are up for 40 hours and they're listening to audiobooks. This, in general, activates another cortical network. So we can differentiate between where the brain is being activated during these tasks, okay? So during the audiobook, we're activating this frontal auditory network. During the driving simulation, it's this posterior network. So they stay up for 40 hours and they do this. They're not allowed to do the other thing, right? They're not allowed, so if you're listening to your book, you're not allowed to be messing around with your hands. Guess what happens? If you keep them up long enough doing this task, all the things that I've said apply. So they will sleep harder in that region once we let them go, right? Go to sleep. So the entire brain will go to sleep, but we will be able to see evidence of regions sleeping more intensely with that special slow wave activity. But also, we will see during the day, okay, in these awake, freely moving people behaving, we will see lapses, off periods. Now, we can't record them intracellularly, but I think I've shown you enough. What we will see is great big slow waves appearing on the cortex. So people are awake, but they will have lapses, and those lapses are associated with, they're regionally specific, right? We've taxed a specific region, and we will see slow waves appearing only there. So the rest of the EEG is activated. So remember, I'm covering the head with 256 electrodes, so it's a full helmet, let's say. And what you see is the appearance of slowing, local slowing on the region that has been overly taxed. So this is essentially the foundation for the errors people make when they're doing things like flying an airplane when they're sleep deprived, or driving a big car. People are notoriously poor at assessing their own level of alertness, let's say, right? So to review, sleep is like a reset button. So when you go to sleep, the brain downscales all the unnecessary business of the day, and it preserves the stuff that's important. In that way, so waking is associated with synaptic strengthening. This is learning, right? And this effect can be local, as I've shown you. Without sleep, the brain becomes saturated, and this learning can no longer happen. And also, when you get saturated, sleep becomes absolutely imperative. So you may be awake, you may be driving, but in fact, there are parts of your brain that are saying, oops, can't do it anymore. That's the price of plasticity. So sleep downscales synapses, leaving what's important. And it's in this way that sleep improves memory. So it consolidates memory by getting rid of the noise and leaving the signal, basically. The signal that you've worked so hard to drive in during the day. And then it frees up resources and space for the next day. That's how it's the reset button. Oh, good heavens. Well, I was going to talk about sleep disorders and local sleep and or local wake in sleep disorders. But in fact, I only have 5 minutes. Am I supposed to stop-ish now?
No, you can keep it going on later.
A little while? Well, so we also in the lab study lots of sleep disorders. One of them, which you might be familiar with, is obstructive sleep apnea. Is anyone familiar with that? A lot of people have it. A lot of men have it. After 45, I think you can argue that all men have a little, regardless of weight. Weight is a big predictor of whether or not you will have obstructive sleep apnea. It's basically a crowding of the upper airway or a floppiness, and it leads to cessation of breathing during sleep. It's associated with all kinds of cognitive effects, all kinds of bad effects. I mean, so it's rough on the cardiac system, but it's particularly hard on the brain. And behaviorally, a person with sleep apnea, people adapt to it very quickly. They think that they're okay. This is why I think compliance with the treatment regime is so low. People say, oh, no, I'm fine. But of course, I've just argued that no, they're not fine. They think they're fine, right? But they're having off periods like crazy, right? So obstructive sleep apnea, this is what a night of sleep looks like. So remember I was showing you that the big red stuff where we had a lot of that important sleep? In obstructive sleep apnea, these big slow waves aren't here. And then, more importantly, we've studied every possible population you can imagine. And in fact, my special interest is in development, children, and children often either snore or have sleep apnea. As you can imagine, with the growing obesity epidemic, sleep apnea in children is getting much more pervasive, right? Children also often snore because they're little and they haven't yet grown into their airways. So they can have a really crowded airway, not because they're overweight, but they have big tonsils, big adenoids. It's a fairly common thing. And see, here's the puzzle over snoring in kids. We always argue that snoring in OSA in kids is relatively benign. And the reason we say that is because when you look at a regular standard EEG in children with this disorder, if you look at an adult, the sleep looks like a mess. You can see them arousing all night long, okay? It's a hideous mess. When you look at a child, though, he doesn't look a mess. And people have argued, well, sleep is so fundamental to development. It's so important to building and optimizing that brain that they don't have disrupted sleep. But the puzzler is, then why do they have such significant behavioral effects? Even a snoring child who does not have, I should have said that obstructive sleep apnea is associated with oxygen desaturations, right? But the brain is darn good at protecting itself from subtle changes in blood oxygenation. But in snoring, there's no pause in breathing. There's no stopping. It's just airway resistance. But it turns out that kids who snore have behavioral effects, learning effects that are almost as significant as kids with OSA. How could that possibly be? Their sleep looks completely normal. But here's the thing. Just like we see in adults, this is the adult data that I just showed you. Just pay attention to this top line here. So remember that good stuff, the slow wave activity in the adults isn't getting back there, right? It isn't getting back there in kids who snore either. Even though in this person, the whole global EEG is a hideous mess, and we can say that person has 500 arousals in a night. With kids with OSA, sleep doesn't look that bad, but it turns out that they're not getting sleep back there. And even in kids who snore, they're not getting sleep back there. And why should we care about this? In children, so another thing I hope I described to you was that we know that sleep mirrors, sleep intensity, the hardness, the deepness of sleep mirrors synaptic strength, right? I said that's what I was showing you when I was showing you those learning tasks. Remember, learning is associated with synaptic strengthening. The other thing that we know, though, is that when you build a brain in a child, you always build it from the back. Brain development goes from back to front, in to out, right? So a 5-6-year-old child, which is the age of the children I just showed you, is still in the middle of building. And this is a high-density EEG in typically developing children. And what we see is that over the course of the lifespan, sleep, this power, this special sleep, is strongest where they are building synapses, okay? So little people, their slow wave activity, for us it's in the front. For them, most of the power is in the back. But, so slow wave activity mirrors brain development, synaptic development, as we would expect it would, based on all the things that I just said, blah, blah, blah. So I'll go back one. Oh, no, I won't go back there. So they're building a brain in the back, you know, the parietal cortex. They're working hard to build that region. But in snoring and in OSA, sleep isn't getting back there. So it's not doing its job. So those kids are not building an optimal brain. We don't know what the long-term consequences are, but you could imagine. I also showed you, or I didn't, that in older adults this is true too. Here and here. So why do we care in older adults that sleep apnea affects posterior sleep intensity? We care for a lot of reasons, but one notable reason is the relationship between OSA and Alzheimer's disease and amyloid deposit. So it turns out that amyloid preferentially deposits right back here, right? We know that OSA always makes Alzheimer's and even dementia worse. So one potential mechanism for that relationship, this is speculative here, all I'm saying to you is that sleep doesn't get back here, amyloid deposits back here. And we know that not only does sleep work on the synapses back here. But there's something remarkable called the glymphatic system that works during sleep. You've probably heard about this. This is all in the news. It's basically the garbage truck of the brain. It clears out metabolic waste. We've only just discovered this. It clears out amyloid in particular. So in people with OSA and Alzheimer's, sleep isn't getting back here. Amyloid is. So sleep may not be doing its job in part because the glymphatic system isn't optimized. So what are some potential mechanisms for this? Why is sleep not getting there? One thing I didn't tell you about those big slow waves is that they are a truly dynamic phenomenon. So the brain doesn't go to sleep all at once. Just like its sleep intensity isn't uniform, the brain doesn't just fall asleep. Slow waves have particular preferential points of origin. They kind of start in the front and in the middle, and they make their way back. So if you are arousing across the night, as you would be in OSA, right, it's conceivable that sleep just doesn't get back there. Slow waves can't travel fast enough to compete with all the arousals that you're having. I will stop after this. Another sleep disorder plagues a lot of people is insomnia, primary insomnia. There's never been a neural signature of this disorder. What we've seen recently is that during sleep in people with insomnia, there is local waking in the sensory cortices. So this red stuff, now I'm changing the whole scene. This red stuff is alpha. Alpha is what you primarily see in a waking brain. So people with insomnia report, not sleeping well, but if you look at them, they seem to sleep fine. But it's probably the case, it looks to us that the case is that, the sensory and auditory cortices are still monitoring the environment. So alpha is a signature of wakefulness, and they are kind of quasi-awake. We study all kinds of sleep disorders, but I will stop there. So that's it. That's my story. Thank you for listening. Yes?
What about medical alteration of sleep? When you're a student and you take no-dose and you can study for an exam, are you really learning better, or do you have to sleep before you?
No, I think that you can't. She wanted to know if we could pharmacologically enhance waking and still be okay.
Right.
No, absolutely not. Somebody said, what about caffeine? It will keep you awake, but I think what you should all take away from this, if nothing else, is that sleep is an absolute imperative. So your frontal cortex may be high on caffeine, but that doesn't mean that your posterior cortex is, right? You can be having off periods. That's sort of the point of the local sleep and local wake story, is that these things, your brain isn't an all or none phenomenon, and sleep or wake isn't an all or none phenomenon. You can think you're awake, but you're not really, or you're not optimally awake, okay? So I would argue that, yeah, of course, you can take uppers and stay awake for some period of time, not that long, but you're not performing well. You probably are falling asleep while you're talking to a friend, or at least locally falling asleep, right? Yes?
Does it make a difference if you take a sleeping pill or you fall asleep normally? Is the brain behave the same once you're asleep?
No. No.
So
There's
people who constantly take sleeping pills at night, they will have different sleep.
Yes. So there's no substitute for physiological sleep. Sleep looks quite different when you take a sleeping pill. And it's not clear that that is restorative sleep. It depends on the sleeping pill. Another thing with sleeping pills, though, right, is that you develop a tolerance so quickly. You need more and more and more. And it does its job less well. I think I didn't repeat the question. I think One story we don't get told, I think, enough is that as you age, sleep changes, and that's normal. So older people will come to the lab and say, I don't sleep. I can't sleep 8 hours a night. But you don't need to sleep 8 hours a night, and your sleep is going to look different. And different doesn't mean abnormal. So it's like, telling a child to sleep 8 hours a night. A child can't sleep 8 hours a night. He needs much more sleep than that. As you age, you sleep less. It happens to everybody, almost everybody. It's almost a universal. So, I think that people should be sort of told by their GPs or whatever, not to live with it and deal with it, but to embrace it. You're going to have, disrupted, you're going to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and you're going to be awake for an hour and then go to sleep, and you're going to feel a little drowsy during the day, and this is part of normal development. Yes?
Where does the dream process come into sleep?
Where does the dream process come into sleep was the question. So dreaming is a really interesting topic. That's a whole other talk. So we also do research on dreaming. So people think that dreaming happens in REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. That's not true. It happens less in that very deep sleep, but it happens in non-REM sleep too. It's qualitatively a little bit different in each of those stages, but we do also do dream research, and I do dream research in children, and it's a nice way to look at the evolution of consciousness, right? So think about it. When you dream, you have a whole internal world. You're disconnected from the environment, but somehow your brain generates a whole world. I will say this. People who remember their dreams are probably not sleeping well. If you wake up and you say, oh, I've never dreamed. I would truly say I've never in my life dreamed. It's usually a reflection of good sleep. If you're remembering your dreams, that means you're having full arousals, which is not a good thing, just to make you feel a little bit worse. Yes?
Is there some evolutionary theory as to insomnia, and do other species have insomnia or something similar to it?
Well, not insomnia necessarily, but yes. So is there some evolutionary theory to insomnia? Do other animals have it? Well, I started out by saying that animals have all kinds of awesome adaptations to the sleep problem. And I will say, when I was a graduate student, I studied migratory songbirds. So when any animal has a big job to do, like migrate or hibernate, right, they adapt to that and they fit their sleep in special ways. So, migratory songbirds, they don't sleep in flight, but a bird who usually needs a big chunk of sleep will, for that 2-month period, sleep in brief bursts, and he'll get the job of sleeping done. So somehow he manages to remain alert and to keep his life going and to avoid predators when he's not getting, presumably, the kind of sleep he needs. So insomnia could be something like that, right? It's, keep...
Some distress.
Well, it does. And the data I showed you suggests that there are parts of the brain that are kind of on alert, right? Wakefulness, particularly the sensory cortices, so that things could be coming in when they shouldn't be coming in. Any others? Yes?
Does it matter how much water you drink? Does that help clean the brain?
No, water is always... Oh, so the question was, does it matter how much water you drink? Well, it does. If it's making you get up and go pee all night, then no. That's bad. You don't want to mechanically induce sleep disruption. But no, there's no evidence that the glymphatic system, that the garbage truck, is enhanced by water. Not that I know of. But I think that, water is definitely a good thing unless it keeps you up at night. Yes, in the way back.
Can you differentiate your comment about pharmaceuticals and transcranial magnetic or electric stimulation or overstimulation? Why is pharmaceuticals have one effect and a strong or a magnetic field have a different effect?
So the question was, let me see if I have this right. You want me to describe how, so you remember transcranial magnetic stimulation, it's when I'm inducing strong synapses with this coil, this metal coil, right? And you want to know how that differs from pharmaceutical agents that keep you up? Is that?
Well,
So the TMS, TMS I mean, it's a clinical tool, but also a research tool. You can do all kinds of cool things with TMS. You know, you can put it in the right place and a person can't speak words, right? If you put it over verbal centers, you can interfere. But what we're doing with that is we are just manually making neurons fire together. So we're inducing synaptic strength, basically, with a magnet. So we're not keeping the whole brain awake. I mean, the brain is just as it is, and then I'm making this particular region wake harder. Let's put it that way, you know, so that I can see how synaptic strength relates to sleep intensity. Pharmaceuticals, I mean, it depends on the drug. I would argue that, I mean, you could take what some of our uppers, Ritalin. You could take Ritalin to stay awake to study for 3 days, let's say. And you could be alert seeming, but there would be dire consequences associated with that use, I think. I think you'd be having off periods. And I think your performance wouldn't be good, even though you might not be aware. People are notoriously bad at knowing how poorly they're doing. Yes, Tom?
Your center is part of the School of Medicine and Public Health.
Indeed.
They train physicians.
They do.
One of the notorious things about residency
Yeah.
is sleep deprivation,
Mm-hmm.
which is great while you want to be in a hospital on the 1st of July.
Mm-hmm.
Is any of the research coming out of here changing how the medical profession trains new doctors?
So Tom wants to know if the work we do influences public policy, specifically as it relates to medical training. Is that right? So this particular work, I would say no, but in general, yes. There are people, you know, so there's a big group at Harvard who has made tremendous strides in that, in making certain that everybody's aware of the implications of sleep loss for people like residents, long-haul truck drivers, airline pilots. But I would say that mothers, and I would say that, I mean, but I would argue that one of the reasons that we should give talks like this is because you all should be aware of the potential policy implications for some of this work. Like, there's a researcher, Mary Carskadden at Brown, who studies adolescence. And during adolescence, there is a pronounced phase shift in sleep timing. It's biologically normal. So out there in Rhode Island, they have delayed sleep start times. So Mary has had a huge policy impact. Now, it hasn't trickled out, and you can imagine, because teachers don't want to go to work at 10 and work till 7, right? So parents don't want to have to adjust their lives. But, I mean, I don't think anybody would say it's not better for a child's learning to accommodate that temporary phase shift. It's true of college students too. They're still adolescents. I mean, they're still in their phase shift, and their brain is still developing quite rapidly. Yeah. Yes?
If one has to go to the bathroom 2 or 3 times a night,
Yes.
does that disrupt sleep intensity?
Yes.
Tom, repeat the question. I think Tom's speaking from personal experience there.
Personal IRB.
I will say this. So sleep intensity, that special kind, right? The non-REM sleep. When you go to sleep, that first hour is the most intense sleep you will have all night long. So yes, in theory, if you disrupt too many cycles, yes, you're disrupting sleep. But it's better to be going later in the night than it is earlier in the night. How about that? And I think that's also biologically normal, particularly for the men folk, going to the bathroom all night long. And does it disrupt sleep? Yes. Is it the end of the world? Probably not. I'm sure you're still learning. Yes?
Could you talk about both meditation and power napping, like a 15 or 20 minute nap during the day, and
Yeah.
its effect on resetting the brain?
Yeah, so the question was, can I talk about meditation and power napping and those reset effects? I can't talk broadly on meditation, although we are involved in, have for many years been involved with the famous Richie Davidson, and studying how sleep looks different in meditators, how and why. And there's a lot to say on that topic. I can't say that they're better sleepers. In fact, what we see in meditators in our first round, so these would be long-term meditators, people who are practice meditators, what they sort of look like is they look like they're more conscious or aware during sleep. Now, having had experience with these people, when I first saw that data set, I thought, yeah, because they're napping all day long. Right? I mean, if you, I shouldn't say this because you're probably all meditators, right? But, you know, when you go to a meditation retreat, my friend Rick is a kind of monk in training, and he has to stand there with a stick. And they're all cross-legged doing whatever they do, humming. And he has to go and whack them so they don't fall asleep. Because, of course, if you're sitting perfectly still in a quiet, hot room, you're going to doze off. You're not supposed to. You're supposed to be meditating. So when I first saw the meditation data, I was like, yeah, well, of course, they have more gamma. They're asleep all day. But I don't know that to be true. And we have a whole, there's a whole big, long story associated with that, which I can't get into. Power napping. So anytime you take a nap, you dissipate sleep need. So you'll sleep less intensely at night. Some people are good nappers, some aren't. There's some genetic component to that. Some people are short sleepers, naturally short sleepers. Most of us need 8 hours. Thomas Edison apparently needed about 5. Margaret Thatcher the same. And that's, if you have developed, across your developmental history, if you've been a short sleeper, you just are a short sleeper. There's no pathology in that. It's rare. Some people are nappers. They can nap during the day and sleep perfectly well at night. They certainly sleep less intensely at night, but you can take care of some of that sleep need during the day in a power nap. And naps are always power naps, right? They're always short. You very rarely have REM sleep. It's not a full sleep cycle. It's just a big chunk of sort of activity. Yes? One more question? Yes?
I was going to ask, does the entire brain have off periods, or is it just the cerebral cortex?
That's a great question. I've shown you, he asked, does the entire brain have off periods or just the cortex? So we're interested in the cortex, but so sleep is kind of a whole brain phenomenon, but the cells in the cerebral cortex are specialized so that, sleep is driven from, it's initiated in the thalamus. You get this big thalamocortical loop where the slow waves are, humming along. And then there are also slow waves that originate in the cortex. So does the thalamus go offline in that way? Yes. Beyond that, I can't say. Anybody else? Other questions? Yes?
If you lose sleep during the middle of the night, say you wake to go to the bathroom and fall back to sleep, do you need to and you lay there for a couple hours to try to fall back asleep, do you need to make that sleep up by sleeping longer in the morning, or how should you handle that?
So this is we're having a theme here. If you wake up in the middle of the night and you go to the bathroom and then you can't fall asleep and you lay there, do you have to make that sleep up? To some extent, it depends. So as you age, not that you're old, sleep need changes. You might not need to sleep 8 hours or even 7 hours. Part of the reason for that, we don't know why that is. I will tell you that the cortex gets thinner. I said that the brain builds up from the back to the front. Well, what comes up must go down. It gets torn down from the front to the back. So this really important region that makes us essentially human starts thinning, right? So that's part of the reason those great big slow waves kind of go away, because they are a reflection of lots of pyramidal cells in the cortex driving together. As you lose those cells, you lose density in the cortex, they go away. It probably means also that you need less sleep. You've got less of those cells to support and to mess with. And it's also individual. It depends on how you feel, too, to some extent. I do think that that people should be made aware of the fact, though, that sleeping less well is developmentally normal as you age. Because it's clear that, we have a collective consciousness that just says, oh my God, I'm not sleeping enough, and then we get anxious about it. But it is normal, as is going to the bathroom 5 times a night, Tom. Prostate?
Who's counting?
Any other questions?
Yay.
One of the things that also is new is that the WA has struck these medallions with the crescent moon on one side and the, whatever may be the limitations, which are trying to be query otherwhere, the sifting and winnowing language on the other side. So we get to give these now to every speaker here at Winston.